Now, let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves a fundamental question. Am I truly okay, or have I simply gotten used to feeling this way? The 12 signs I'll share with you today will help you answer this question objectively, because some signs, when ignored, only grow stronger. The more we silence them, the deeper they go. Many people who believe they're mentally well are actually overlooking serious signals without even realizing it, okay? From the outside, everything may appear to be fine, but a very different story may be unfolding on the inside. That story often begins quietly. Your sleep patterns start to shift. You begin withdrawing from social interactions. Your motivation slowly decreases. But we often brush these off with labels like stress, seasonal changes, or just a rough day. In reality, your brain may be trying to silently warn you that something isn't right. Of course, it's normal to face challenges in life. Relationships end, careers stumble, we experience losses. These moments weigh us down. They hurt, and sometimes they even lead us to step back from life for a while. That is a completely human process. But the critical question is this: at what point do these struggles shift from being temporary challenges to becoming long-term psychological harm? That awareness isn't just the first step toward healing. It's the foundation of true mental resilience. Because when our mental health starts to deteriorate, it's not just our mood that's affected. Our decision-making abilities, our capacity to focus, and even our immune system are impacted. The brain is the conductor of the body. When its rhythm is disrupted, the entire system falls out of tune. Every person needs to maintain at least a basic sense of respect and compassion for themselves. This isn't just an emotional need, it's a core element of psychological integrity. A person who doesn't love themselves slowly begins to disconnect not only from who they are, but from life itself. Up to this point, the Stoic philosopher Epictetus offers a striking reminder: a man is what he thinks about himself. If your thoughts are centered around feelings of worthlessness, inadequacy, or self-hate, over time, your identity begins to accept those thoughts as reality. In mental health, this has a very clear explanation. According to psychologist Carl Rogers, a healthy self-concept begins with unconditional self-acceptance. But if someone constantly receives negative feedback from others, those feelings of worthlessness can become deeply ingrained. This isn't just a passing emotional state. According to the American Psychological Association, lack of self-love is more than low self-esteem. It is a key factor in the development of depressive disorders. What's more, the brain responds biologically to these internal narratives. A mind that keeps repeating "I'm not enough" chronically elevates cortisol levels. This weakens the functioning of the prefrontal cortex, disrupts decision-making, and even compromises the immune system. In modern neuropsychology, this is referred to as the self-threat system. So when you constantly treat yourself with hostility, your body responds as if it's under distress. It enters a state of survival, which leads us to this question: when did you start being so harsh with yourself? And even more importantly, when did you stop noticing that you were? In individuals with a healthy mental functioning, we typically expect a natural tendency to seek solutions or to actively cope when faced with problems. This is the result of the prefrontal cortex activating and enabling logical, goal-directed, and structured behaviors. However, when someone is experiencing a psychological issue, this process becomes disrupted, and instead of pursuing a solution, avoidance behaviors take over. These avoidance behaviors often appear harmless, sometimes even ordinary, from the outside. Even if the solution to the problem seems simple on the surface, the individual unconsciously develops ways to avoid facing it. For example, excessive sleeping may serve as a form of emotional shutdown. Insac, quasi sleep stops being a tool for recovery and becomes part of emotional numbing. Or instead of directly confronting emotional pain, a person may turn to food. What we call emotional eating temporarily activates the brain's reward system by increasing dopamine release. But this is only a short-term method of forgetting. In the long run, it can lead to serious health consequences like obesity or metabolic syndrome. Psychoanalyst Karen Horney suggested that when faced with emotions they cannot process, people typically respond in one of three ways: fight, flight, or freeze. Avoidance behaviors are essentially a refined version of the second response, flight. Rather than confronting the emotional threat, the person chooses to withdraw from it. Sometimes that withdrawal takes the form of alcohol, sometimes drugs, and sometimes excessive shopping or compulsive work habits. So how does the brain regulate these behaviors? The limbic system Particularly structures like the amygdala and hippocampus interprets emotional pain as a severe stress signal. When a person struggles to carry that emotional burden over time, the brain creates a kind of neurological shortcut. That shortcut prioritizes escaping the problem rather than solving it. And this is precisely where addiction begins. A substance or behavior that was initially used just to forget eventually becomes more accessible than actually solving the problem. It's easier. It works immediately, but it comes with a cost. The renowned philosopher Kierkegaard once said, "Man becomes free not by fleeing from what he cannot face, but by staring directly at it." But that kind of courage doesn't come from motivation alone. It depends on mental resilience. And psychological disorders slowly erode that resilience. Eventually, the person wakes up one morning and realizes they haven't solved anything. They've only covered it up. But by then, the cover has become thicker, heavier, and every new avoidance behavior only adds to its weight. One of the most direct ways to understand a person's mental health is by looking at the relationships they build with others. Because the human mind doesn't grow and heal in isolation, it evolves through connection. Our brains develop not only through internal processes, but also through meaningful interactions with other minds. In that sense, our social relationships serve as a mirror for our psychological state. That's why, in my initial sessions with clients, one of the first questions I ask is, do you have close friends? How is your relationship with your family? These questions can help bring to light the emotional burdens often hidden behind personal isolation. If a person is constantly in conflict with those around them, if they're distant from everyone or find it difficult to form or maintain connections, this is not just a communication issue, right? In many causes, it reflects an inner chaos being projected outward. And the most concerning scenario is when someone no longer wants to connect with anyone at all, when they can't name even a single person they feel safe with. At that point, loneliness is no longer an emotional preference. It becomes a psychological symptom. The impact of social isolation on mental health is well defined in today's neuroscience literature. Long-term studies conducted by UCLA's Neuroscience Laboratory have shown that loneliness activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Specifically, the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula respond to social rejection as though it were a genuine threat. In other words, when someone feels alone, their brain interprets it as injury. This is why relational breakdowns should never be underestimated. Of course, people change and relationships evolve, right? Sometimes we start having problems with people we once got along well with. We dwell on things. We overthink or we develop anxiety disorders that unintentionally damage our connections. For individuals with obsessive thoughts or social anxiety, these internal knots can gradually sever ties with the external world. And this detachment doesn't just affect emotional life, it can extend into academic and professional performance as well. That's when the red flag goes up. Okay? If symptoms like lack of focus, difficulty concentrating, or social withdrawal lasts only a day or two, that's perfectly normal. But if they persist for weeks and even increase in intensity, this may not be an adjustment issue. It may be the sign of a clinical condition. At the core of Socratic thought lies a principle. A person comes to know themselves only through another. If we can't form healthy connections with others, it's likely that our connection to ourselves has also been damaged. And that precisely is where the foundation of mental health begins to crack. People who maintain a healthy mental balance are generally able to establish a certain harmony between their desires and their fears. Their fears don't disappear entirely, but they become manageable. Because mental wholeness is not only shaped by what we want, but also by how well we can navigate what we fear. We all have concerns about life, perceptions of risk, uneasiness about the unknown, fears about what may come. But when those fears start to interfere with our ability to act, we're no longer talking about normal anxiety. We're facing a psychological blockage. According to the clinical psychology literature, anxiety disorders are not simply defined by the presence of fear, but by the extent to which that fear directs a person's behavior. In other words, someone may have goals, desires, even passions. But if fear has built a wall in front of those aspirations, that person is no longer free. They construct a mental space surrounded by barbed wire, and as the fence grows taller each day, they may appear to stand at the center of life, yet emotionally feel like they're drifting toward its edges. Okay? It's as if they're living on the sidelines of their own existence. Psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Rollo may summarize this well when he wrote, "Fear is the force that freezes the will." And indeed, fear has the power to paralyze the decision-making process. The functioning of the prefrontal cortex weakens, the amygdala takes over, and the person begins to live in a state of constant threat perception. As a result, even taking a single step forward can feel like walking toward disaster, and this perception becomes the greatest barrier between a person and their true potential. Over time, this doesn't just result in avoidance. The person begins to define themselves by what they haven't done. They develop resentment toward the dreams they never pursued. This creates an inner sense of unrest. Happiness, fulfillment, even the simple joy of being alive begins to feel out of reach because the mind remains in a constant state of alert. If you feel distant from the things you want and closer to the things you fear, if life feels like it's stuck in standby mode, this isn't laziness, right? It may be a sign of cognitive narrowing, and if left unaddressed, that narrowing grows quietly but steadily from the inside out. You are still free as long as what you fear hasn't taken control of you. But if fear has started to lead the way, you may already have lost your internal freedom. And the loss of freedom is equivalent to the loss of mental health, one of the most overlooked, but perhaps most defining. Questions when assessing one's mental health is this: what are you dependent on in your life? Because addiction isn't limited to substances. It can be tied to circumstances, to people, or even to certain patterns of thought, okay? And this type of dependency often erodes a person's mental resilience slowly, yet with absolute certainty. At its core, addiction is the inability to let go of something even when we know it's hurting us. In other words, the person clings to what causes them pain. Why? Because the brain finds familiar pain safer than unknown comfort. Here, neuroscience provides a clear explanation. The dopamine system doesn't just encode what feels good, it reinforces what becomes habitual. Whether it's a substance, a toxic relationship, or a damaging work environment, repeated exposure forms a neural circuit, and breaking that circuit becomes extremely difficult. At that point, the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for rational decision-making, gets overwritten by the emotional intensity of the limbic system. So even though the person knows a relationship is harmful or the environment is depleting them, they can't seem to walk away. The brain is no longer optimized for recognizing danger. It's conditioned to maintain what feels familiar. Psychotherapist Pia Melody refers to this as confusing love with addiction. Individuals who have experienced childhood trauma are especially vulnerable to staying in harmful relationships, because the pain they once internalized as normal becomes the framework for emotional familiarity. And in adulthood, stepping outside that framework triggers unconscious feelings of threat. So even when they know they're being hurt, they stay. This doesn't just lead to emotional fatigue. It has physiological consequences as well, okay? Sleep quality deteriorates, the immune system weakens, chronic inflammation increases. Even individuals who appear mentally intact may begin to show signs of depression over time if they remain in a toxic relationship. That's why it's so important to take a close look at the people around you. Are they healing you or slowly wearing you down? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once said, "A man believes he is free simply because he is unaware of the chains of his desires." And that is precisely what addiction is. It is the sum of all the harmful things you've tied to your life through invisible chains. And unless you recognize those chains, it is impossible to make a truly accurate assessment of your mental health. In life, we all experience both good and bad things. That's something we can't change. But here's what we need to pay attention to. It's not what happens to us that shapes our mental health. It's how we respond to it. People with a healthy mental balance may still break down, feel sadness, or experience pain in the face of adversity, but they don't allow that experience to define their entire life. Yes, they grieve, but they also recover because their nervous system is flexible. They don't suppress their emotions. They allow themselves to feel, but they also find a way out without drowning in those emotions. As Stanford University psychiatrist Dr. David Spiegel puts it, mental wellness is the capacity to face stress and return to balance. This is where the ability to adapt becomes crucial. It could be the loss of a loved one, a breakup, or even financial collapse. And of course, you might miss that person, feel pain from time to time, and carry that sadness with you. But a healthy mind eventually arrives at a quiet but powerful statement. Life goes on. This doesn't mean forgetting. On the contrary, it means healing through remembrance. It means the mind has found meaning despite the pain and chosen to live with it. In psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross' grief model, this is the final stage. Acceptance, accepting what is, and learning to live with that truth. But right now, I want you to pay close attention. If someone is dealing with a psychological issue, or if an experience has evolved into one, adaptation may never come, even with the passage of time. Days, months, even years may go by, yet the person still feels stuck in the pain of the first moment. From the outside, others may say, "Why does this still matter?" But their nervous system remains frozen in that initial trauma. A 1-month relationship may turn into 5 years of grief, right? A financial loss might lead someone to completely withdraw from professional life. Why? Because the mind is no longer guided by experience. It's being driven by fear. And this marks a critical shift. Adaptation is replaced by avoidance. This is what we call the nervous system's failure to process trauma. When the brain can't find resolution, it becomes fixated. When the unknown is coded as a threat, the idea of trying again starts to ring alarm bells. This is exactly where psychologist Bessel van der Kolk's well-known phrase becomes relevant. The body keeps the score. When the mind can't move forward, the body stores the pain. Stress hormones remain elevated, the immune system is suppressed, and the individual unconsciously withdraws from life. The result, instead of adapting, the person enters a frozen state of consciousness. The mind begins to navigate a mental map shaped by fear. The idea of working again, loving again, trusting again, all of it feels impossible, and the person begins to declare this limited, constricted space their safe zone. But in reality, that zone is not a place of safety. It's a space where growth is absent and healing is postponed. And this form of mental closure may be a strong indicator of an underlying psychological issue. In life, we all have certain defined and familiar routines. Our appetite patterns, sleep rhythms, social interactions, and even the distance we maintain with solitude all settle into a personal balance. Ryan wakes up at 8 in the morning, drinks his coffee, black, eats small amounts, but frequently meets with friends at specific times during the day and never ends the day without an evening walk. These are expressions of his individual structure and signs of long-term stability. These routines, in many ways, are the biological signatures of psychological health. Psychiatrist Daniel Siegel calls this personal rhythmic balance. The brain thrives on order. As long as that order continues, the nervous system feels safe. But now, I want you to pay close attention, okay? When the mind's balance is disrupted, these familiar rhythms begin to shift. Ryan, who used to eat very little, suddenly starts raiding the kitchen at night, or his once stable appetite vanishes, and within a few weeks, he loses noticeable weight. Someone who normally struggles with insomnia suddenly finds they can't get out of bed. They wrestle with the sheets, or the opposite, a deep sleeper starts tossing and turning all night, unable to silence the mind. Because when the mind is noisy, the body refuses to stay quiet. These changes aren't just physiological. They spill into the social realm as well. Maybe Ryan used to enjoy spending time with friends, but now he doesn't return messages, avoids gatherings, isolates himself in his room. Or the reverse, someone who used to prefer solitude now rushes outside constantly, diving into fast-paced, shallow relationships. What happened to make such a dramatic swing in behavior? This is precisely where we must recognize something important. When we start to swing sharply to extremes within our own baseline, it's a powerful indicator that mental health may be deteriorating. Clinical psychology refers to these kinds of behavioral shifts as evolutionary defense responses. When the brain loses balance, it often overcompensates in an attempt to restore it. This tells us something critical. The body's balance is directly tied to the brain's chemical rhythm. And when that rhythm breaks down, our habits blur, and eventually, so does our identity. That's why if Ryan today seems like the opposite of who he was a month ago, it may not be a temporary fluctuation. It may be a de-stress signal from the nervous system. If we ignore that signal, the instability becomes chronic, and we drift away from our straight path into chaos. The soul speaks loudest through the whisper of behavior. And to hear those whispers, we must offer ourselves moments of silence. Because the most important warnings always come from within. Sometimes, we look around at the people in our lives and silently wonder, how are they so happy, right? Their laughter, their plans, their joyful moments, shared online, only deepen the sense of emptiness we feel inside. The louder their joy, the more we hear our own silence. And if thoughts like these start repeating in your mind, why am I like this? Why does life feel so heavy? Why does happiness feel like a story written only for others? Then it's time to pause and pay attention, okay? Because this isn't just a confidence issue. It might be a signal that your mental health is starting to tighten. In a healthy state of mind, other people's happiness feels inspiring, not threatening. But when your inner world is unbalanced, the outside world starts to feel distant, unfamiliar, like a party you weren't invited to. Everyone seems to have figured life out while you feel like you're falling apart. And that's where the feeling of being trapped begins. Ryan, for instance, may feel like he's locked inside a box of thoughts, fears, and doubts. The world keeps spinning outside, but it feels unreachable. According to Leon Fessinger's social comparison theory, we constantly evaluate ourselves by measuring against others. But when that difference begins to feel like a threat, your mind enters alarm mode. You no longer just notice what others have, you start defining yourself by what you lack. This creates a powerful sense of deficiency, exclusion, and eventually isolation. Sometimes it's not about what others have. It's about how your mind reacts to the smallest things. What seems trivial to someone else, like a minor health scare, can feel like a towering mountain to you. That passing glance on the street, that random thought about contamination, it gets stuck, it loops, it grows, it becomes something you can't unsee. And here's the danger. That anxiety doesn't just stay in your thoughts. It disrupts your sleep. It strains your relationships. It hijacks your decision making. And when people who love you start saying, Ryan, don't you think this is getting a bit too much? But you still can't let it go. Maybe don't even want to let it go. That's when a thought becomes a mental trap. This is a common dynamic in obsessive compulsive disorders. Neuroscientist and psychiatrist Jeffrey Schwartz has shown through his research that the brain can rewire itself and that even deeply ingrained thought loops can change. These thoughts aren't just exaggerations. They're the habits of the brain. Habits that can be reshaped with the right tools. Philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. But if your mind is in a storm, even silence can feel like a threat, okay? That's why recognizing the darkness within is the most important step before you get lost in it. Because even darkness is a message. It's the quiet scream of your soul asking you to start searching for the light. Now, here's a truth we need to state clearly. Relationships are often what heal us most, and unfortunately, they're also what hurt us the deepest. This is not a contradiction. It's the central tension of human nature. Our minds are wired for connection, but overachieving those connections can twist into knots. If you're in a difficult relationship, one that keeps you constantly on edge, filled with endless arguments, subtle humiliations, and repeated emotional bruises, then a critical threshold may have already been crossed. Just because your brain has adapted to these conditions doesn't mean those conditions are healthy. The mind learns to cope under prolonged stress. Tension starts to feel normal. Arguments get rationalized with phrases like every couple fights. And a person might believe they haven't been mentally harmed. But listen closely. Just because you don't feel pain doesn't mean you haven't taken damage. Psychiatrist Gabor Mate puts it this way: the mind may suppress, but the body never forgets. If a relationship constantly keeps you on high alert, your cortisol system is likely running nonstop, which means your nervous system is slowly wearing down. In these kinds of relationships, emotional numbness can develop because the brain begins to normalize danger. It's similar to how people living in war zones adjust to the sound of explosions. The brain may adapt to the noise, but deep inside the system, silent destruction continues. The balance between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala starts to collapse, decision-making deteriorates. Emotional responses either shut down completely or become hypersensitive. As psychotherapist Esther Perel says, it's not the relationship that changes, it's the person. Understanding the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala is the key to mastering emotional regulation. The prefrontal cortex, located at the very front of the brain, functions like the CEO of your mind. It's responsible for higher-order thinking, planning, decision-making, focus, and self-control. It's the voice that says, wait, think, stay calm, choose wisely. The amygdala, on the other hand, sits deeper in the brain and is part of the limbic system. It's your built-in alarm system constantly scanning for danger and triggering emotional responses, especially fear and anger. It's the voice that screams, run, fight. This is a threat. Here's the critical part. These two regions are directly connected, and that connection works in both directions. If someone yells at you, your amygdala might fire up instantly, urging you to react defensively. But when your prefrontal cortex is functioning well, it steps in to evaluate the situation before you act. In other words, it turns down the volume of the amygdala. However, under chronic stress, sleep deprivation, or trauma, this balance can collapse. The prefrontal cortex shuts down and the amygdala takes over. The result? Outbursts of anger, irrational fears, impulsive behaviors. So if you constantly feel like tension is about to erupt in your relationship, if the moments of peace are getting shorter and shorter between conflicts, that's not a sign of adaptation. It's a warning sign. Your nervous system may be stuck in fight or flight mode. Relationships don't just shape us emotionally, they reshape us neurochemically. And if that transformation is moving in the wrong direction, the outcome isn't just sadness, it can be a true psychological breakdown. This is why, even if you don't feel like you're in severe emotional pain, you must still listen to what your body is quietly saying. If your sleep is disrupted, if you get frequent headaches, if your energy is low, if your eating patterns have suddenly shifted, your body might be screaming for help. Because every toxic relationship quietly erodes your internal system. As philosopher Simone Weil said, the soul does not shatter, but it melts. And recognizing that slow melting, choosing to stop, reflect, and ask for support is not weakness. It is a true sign of resilience. Okay? The feedback we receive from people around us can act as a mirror to our inner world. Sometimes others notice things we're unaware of. They see the shift before we do. But here's something crucial. We need to distinguish not just the message, but the messenger. Because not all feedback is rooted in care. If it's coming from someone who constantly belittles you, invalidates your worth, or uses concern as a tool to assert superiority, then that's not feedback. It's manipulation. Statements like, you're mentally unstable, you need help, may not be coming from compassion. They might be designed to weaken you. But now I want you to really focus here. If someone you trust, someone who has shared life with you for years, a close friend, a family member, maybe even a colleague who knows you well, says something like, Ryan, you don't seem like yourself anymore. You're more tense, more reactive, more withdrawn. Maybe talking to someone could help, then that's a voice worth listening to. Because sometimes the mind builds walls of denial. You normalize your inner struggles, but someone on the outside may have a much clearer view of what's changing inside. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, one does not see their own shadow clearly, but often catches its reflection in the face of another. If multiple trusted people are giving you the same feedback, it's a sign your shadow is now visible. That's the moment to pause and look inward. Because if the symptoms you're experiencing are not fleeting, if they're not just a bad day or a tough week, but are stretching across weeks or even months, intensifying over time, then what you're dealing with is not a passing wave. It's a pattern. And patterns don't shift without intervention. Daily mood swings are one thing, but if you're deeply drained, struggling in relationships, or losing touch with your sense of self, that's the sign of something deeper, something clinical. Here's where the mind plays one of its trickiest games. I've got this? Sure, for mild de-stress. That might work. You take a break, you pray, you go into nature, you talk with friends, and you feel better. But moderate to severe psychological challenges rarely resolve with lifestyle tweaks alone. Because at that level, brain chemistry is involved, neurotransmitter imbalances, hormone shifts, and disrupted emotional regulation circuits are now part of the equation. According to long-term mental health studies published by Harvard University, over 70% of moderate to severe psychological issues become chronic if left untreated. That's why seeking help is not weakness. It's the highest form of self-awareness. It means telling yourself, I don't have to carry this alone. As psychotherapist Irvin Yalom says, asking for help is not surrender, it's courage. And that courage is often the doorway to true healing. So let's say you're experiencing some of these symptoms. What do you do then? Where do you start? This is where I want to pause and tell you something very clear. Something important. You are not alone in this. And knowing that your first step should be a secure and grounded one. That step is seeking professional help. I strongly recommend starting with a psychiatrist because when it comes to evaluating mental processes, The most accurate approach begins by examining the neurobiological foundations. Sometimes psychotherapy alone is enough, but other times additional pharmacological support may be needed, and the person who can make that distinction with a conscious, ethical, and integrative mindset is a well-trained psychiatrist. And remember, it's never too late. There are so many people who lived in emotional darkness for years, even decades, but the moment they found the courage to ask for help, they began building a new life. That transformation is possible for you too. You are not meant to live in this darkness. And until you make peace with your mind, your body will remain in distress, because the brain and the body are on the same ship. When one starts to sink, it pulls the other down with it. Thank you for listening. Truly. If this video was helpful to you, consider giving it a like. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. I'd love to see you again in future episodes. But before all of that, right now, be kind to yourself, because you truly deserve it. And your healing won't stop with you. It will ripple out to heal others too.